The shovel hit the hard Arizona earth with a sound that echoed across the emptiness, and Catherine Reed knew she would never finish this grave before the sun turned her husband's body into something she could not bear to remember. Her hands were already bleeding through the blisters that had formed an hour ago, and the hole was barely 2 feet deep. The ground outside Superior, Arizona was unforgiving in August of 1882, baked solid by a sun that showed no mercy to the living or the dead. Catherine's black mourning dress clung to her body with sweat, and her dark hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in damp strands around her face. She was 23 years old and had been married for less than a year. Now she was a widow, standing alone in the desert with a shovel and a body wrapped in their wedding quilt. Thomas had been dead since dawn. A rattlesnake had found its way into their small homestead during the night, and by the time Catherine woke to his gasping, the venom had already done its work. She had tried everything she knew, but he died holding her hand as the sun rose over the Superstition Mountains in the distance. There was no doctor within 20 miles, no undertaker, no neighbors close enough to hear her screams. Just Catherine and the body of the man she had followed from Missouri with dreams of building a life in the territories. She drove the shovel down again, and this time it hit rock. The impact sent pain shooting through her shoulders and down her spine. She let out a sob that she had been holding back since Thomas took his last breath and the shovel fell from her hands. Catherine sank to her knees beside the shallow hole, her body shaking with grief and exhaustion. The sun was climbing higher, and she knew what that meant. She had to get Thomas in the ground soon, or she would lose even the comfort of burying him with dignity. That was when she heard the horse. Catherine's head snapped up, and she saw him coming across the desert floor, a lone rider on a paint horse, moving at an easy pace that suggested he had nowhere particular to be. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle that Thomas had always kept near the door, but she had left it inside the house when she dragged his body out here. She was alone, unarmed and completely vulnerable. In the territories, that could mean anything from salvation to disaster. The rider drew closer, and Catherine could make out more details. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dusty brown hat and clothes that had seen hard use. A gun belt sat low on his hips, and he rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. As he approached, he slowed his horse and removed his hat, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He looked to be in his late 20s, with serious blue eyes that took in the scene before him with quick understanding. "Madam," he said, his voice low and respectful. He did not dismount, waiting for her permission to come closer. Catherine stood slowly, aware of how she must look, covered in dust and sweat and tears, standing over a grave and a body. "Please go," she said, but her voice cracked. "I am managing." The cowboy looked at the shallow hole, at the wrapped body, at Catherine's bleeding hands still clutching her skirts. His eyes moved to the small homestead behind her, taking in its lonely isolation. "With respect, madam, you are not managing at all." "I do not need help," Catherine said. But even as she spoke, she swayed on her feet. She had not eaten since yesterday, had not slept, had not stopped moving since Thomas died. The world tilted slightly, and she put out a hand to steady herself. The cowboy dismounted in one smooth motion and was at her side before she could protest. "Easy now," he said, his hand gentle on her elbow. "When did you eat last?" "I do not know," Catherine admitted. Up close, she could see that his eyes were kind, despite their seriousness, and there was a scar along his jaw that suggested he had lived through his own share of trouble. "My husband died this morning. I have to bury him before the heat ruins him." The cowboy looked at the body, then at the grave, then at Catherine. "My name is Xavier Thompson," he said. "I have buried men before. Let me help you." "I cannot pay you," Catherine said, hating how her voice shook. "We have almost nothing." "I am not asking for payment," Xavier said. He walked to the grave and picked up the shovel. "I am asking you to go inside and drink some water before you fall down dead beside him." Catherine wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity and independence, but her body was betraying her. Her legs felt like they might give out at any moment, and her vision was starting to blur at the edges. "I should stay with him," she whispered. "Your husband is past caring whether you watch or not," Xavier said, not unkindly. "But you are still alive and you need to take care of yourself. Go on now. I will do this right." Something in his voice made Catherine trust him. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the way he looked at Thomas's body with respect rather than curiosity. She nodded slowly and turned toward the house, her feet dragging through the dust. Behind her, she heard the shovel bite into the earth with a force and rhythm she could never have managed. Xavier Thompson was a strong man, and he worked like someone who understood the urgency. Inside the small homestead, Catherine pumped water from the basin and drank until her stomach protested. The house was a simple two-room structure that Thomas had built with his own hands, dreaming of the day they would add more rooms for children. Now those rooms would never be built, and those children would never be born. Catherine looked around at the life she had tried to make here and felt the weight of its impossibility settle on her shoulders. Through the window, she could see Xavier working. He had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, and he attacked the ground with steady determination. The grave was already noticeably deeper. Catherine watched him for a long moment, this stranger who had appeared from nowhere to help her in her darkest hour. Then she forced herself to eat some bread, though it tasted like ashes in her mouth. By the time she returned outside, carrying a cup of water for Xavier, the grave was nearly finished. He had dug it deep and proper, the kind of grave that would keep out animals and weather. Sweat poured down his face, but he did not stop until the hole was exactly right. Only then did he climb out and accept the water Catherine offered. "Thank you," he said, drinking deeply. "That is good water. We have a spring nearby," Catherine said. "It is why Thomas chose this spot." She looked at the grave and felt fresh tears start to fall. "He thought we would be happy here." Xavier did not offer empty platitudes. Instead, he said, "Would you like to say goodbye before we lower him in?" Catherine nodded and knelt beside Thomas's body. She pulled back the quilt enough to see his face one last time. Already waxen and still in death, he had been a good man, if not a particularly practical one. He had believed in dreams and possibilities, and he had loved her with the kind of uncomplicated devotion that seemed rare in this harsh world. She kissed his forehead and whispered words meant only for him, then covered his face again. "I am ready," she said, standing. Xavier lifted Thomas's body with surprising gentleness and lowered it into the grave. The wrapped form looked small in that deep hole, and Catherine felt her heart break all over again. Xavier climbed out and stood beside her, his hat in his hands. "Would you like me to say something?" he asked. Catherine looked at him in surprise. "You are a preacher?" "No, madam," Xavier said. "But I have stood over enough graves to know that words matter, even if nobody but the living can hear them." "Please," Catherine whispered. Xavier bowed his head, and Catherine did the same. His voice was low and steady, carrying across the empty desert. "Lord, we commit this man to the earth, dust to dust, ashes to ashes. We do not know all his days or all his deeds, but we know he was loved by this woman, and that counts for something in this world. Give him peace in the next life, and give her strength to continue in this one. Amen." "Amen," Catherine echoed, her voice barely audible. Together they filled in the grave. Xavier did most of the work, but Catherine insisted on helping, needing to feel like she was doing something for Thomas one last time. When the earth was mounded over the spot, Xavier found some large rocks and arranged them to mark the grave and keep animals from digging. It was not a fancy burial, but it was respectful and proper. "Do you have any people you can go to?" Xavier asked when they were finished. Catherine shook her head. "Thomas was my people. We came out here alone, thinking we could make something of this land." She looked at the small homestead, with its pathetic garden and rough-hewn walls. "He was a dreamer, not a farmer. We were already struggling before he died. What will you do now? Xavier asked. I do not know, Catherine admitted. The full weight of her situation was starting to settle on her. She was a woman alone in the territories, with no money, no family, and no prospects. The homestead claim had been in Thomas's name. She could not work it alone, and even if she could, she had no idea how to survive out here without him. I suppose I will have to go back east if I can find a way to pay for passage. Xavier was quiet for a long moment, looking at the grave, then at Catherine, then at the horizon. I have a proposition, he said finally. Hear me out before you answer. Catherine waited, too tired to be wary. I have been working as a ranch hand at the Double T Ranch, about 30 miles north of here, Xavier said. Good outfit, decent owner. They are looking for a cook and housekeeper for the main house. The pay is fair, and you would have room and board. It is honest work, and you would be safe there. Why are you telling me this? Catherine asked. Because you need help, and I know you need it, Xavier said. I can take you there, introduce you to Mrs. Taylor, who runs the house. She is a good woman, and she would treat you right. Catherine looked at this stranger who had buried her husband and was now offering her a lifeline. Why would you do this for me? You do not know me at all. Xavier met her eyes steadily. My mother died when I was 12, and my father could not take care of my sisters and me alone. A neighbor woman took us in, no questions asked, and kept us together until we were old enough to make our own way. I have never forgotten that kindness. Maybe this is my chance to pass it along. There was something in his face that told Catherine he was telling the truth. What about the homestead? She asked. Lock it up, Xavier said. If you decide you want to come back, it will be here. If you decide to let it go, someone else will claim it eventually. Either way, you do not have to decide right now. Catherine looked around at the life she had tried to build with Thomas. It seemed cruel to just walk away from it, but staying seemed impossible. When would we leave? She asked. I would say give yourself tonight to rest and gather what you need, Xavier said. We can leave at first light tomorrow. The ride will take most of the day, but we can make it in one go if we start early. Catherine nodded slowly. All right, she said. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Xavier, he corrected gently. And you are welcome, Mrs. Reed. Catherine, she said, if we are to be informal. Xavier settled his hat back on his head and looked toward the horizon. I will make camp nearby tonight, give you some privacy. If you need anything, just call out. I will hear you. He started to turn away, but Catherine reached out and touched his arm. Xavier, she said, and he turned back. Why were you riding out here? This is not exactly well-traveled country. Xavier smiled slightly, the first real expression she had seen from him beyond seriousness. I was looking for a lost calf that wandered from the herd. Found you instead. He tipped his hat. Funny how things work out sometimes. Catherine watched him lead his horse away to set up camp on the other side of the small rise that sheltered her homestead from the worst of the desert winds. Then she turned and went back inside, moving through the house like a ghost. Everything reminded her of Thomas, the table he had built, the bed frame he had assembled with such pride, the dishes they had eaten from together. She had thought they would have a lifetime here. Instead, they had barely had a year. She packed what little she owned into 2 bags. Clothes, a few books, her mother's locket, Thomas's pocket watch, the practical items that would help her start over. Then she sat at the table and wrote a letter to Thomas's parents back in Missouri, telling them what had happened and where she was going. She would mail it from Superior when she could. It was the least she could do. That night, Catherine could not sleep. She lay in the bed she had shared with Thomas and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the desert. At some point, she heard Xavier's voice, low and steady, singing something she could not quite make out. It was strangely comforting, knowing he was there. She had been so alone since Thomas died, and the presence of another human being, even a stranger, made the darkness less oppressive. When dawn broke, Catherine was already dressed and ready. She took one last look around the homestead, said goodbye to Thomas at his grave, and walked to where Xavier was saddling his horse. "Ready?" he asked. "As I will ever be," Catherine said. Xavier had rigged a lead line for Catherine's horse, a mare that Thomas had bought with dreams of breeding stock that never materialized. Catherine mounted, settling her bags behind her saddle, and they set out toward the north as the sun climbed into the sky. The ride was long and hot, but Xavier set a steady pace that ate up the miles without exhausting the horses. He did not talk much, but his silence was comfortable rather than awkward. When they stopped to water the horses at a small creek, he shared his food with Catherine without making it seem like charity. "How long have you been at the Double T?" Catherine asked as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood tree. "3 years," Xavier said. "I drifted for a while after my father died, working different ranches, but the Double T felt right. Mr. Taylor is a fair man, and he runs a tight operation. I have been thinking about saving up to buy my own place eventually, but that is still a few years off." "Do you have family still?" Catherine asked. "My older sister married a shopkeeper in Tucson," Xavier said. "My younger sister is teaching school in Phoenix. We write when we can, but I do not see them much." He looked at Catherine. "What about you? Any family back east?" "My parents died of cholera when I was 18, Catherine said. "I was working as a seamstress in St. Louis when I met Thomas. He was so full of plans and dreams, and he made me believe we could build something wonderful out here." She smiled sadly. "I suppose I should have known better. Dreams do not feed you or protect you from rattlesnakes." "Dreams are not bad," Xavier said, "but they work best when paired with practical skills and hard work. Sounds like your Thomas had plenty of dreams, but maybe not enough of the other part." It was a fair assessment, and Catherine could not argue with it. Thomas had been a clerk back in Missouri, with no experience farming or ranching or surviving in the territories. He had relied on optimism and determination, and it had not been enough. "He tried," she said. "That has to count for something." "It does," Xavier agreed. "And you tried with him. That counts for even more." They rode on, and as the day progressed, Catherine found herself noticing things about Xavier. The way he sat his horse with easy grace, the way he scanned the horizon constantly with practiced wariness, the way he made sure she was comfortable without fussing over her. He was a capable man, the kind who did not need to prove himself because his competence spoke for itself. It was different from Thomas, who had always been trying to convince everyone, including himself, that he knew what he was doing. By late afternoon, they crested a rise, and Catherine saw the Double T Ranch spread out below them. It was bigger than she had expected, with a substantial main house, several outbuildings, corrals full of horses, and cattle dotting the grassland that stretched toward the mountains. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house, and she could see people moving around, going about their work. "That is home," Xavier said, and there was something in his voice that spoke of genuine affection for the place. They rode down into the ranch yard, and immediately a woman emerged from the main house. She was in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and a face that suggested she did not suffer fools. She looked at Catherine with sharp eyes, taking in her mourning dress and exhausted face. "Xavier," the woman said, "you found your calf?" "No, madam," Xavier said, dismounting. "But I found something more important. Mrs. Taylor, this is Catherine Reed. She lost her husband yesterday and needs work and a place to stay. I told her you might have use for a cook and housekeeper." Mrs. Taylor's expression softened immediately. She came forward and took Catherine's hand as she dismounted. "You poor dear," she said, her voice warm with genuine sympathy. "Come inside. You look like you are about to fall over." "I can work," Catherine said quickly. "I am a hard worker, and I can cook and clean and sew. I will not be a burden." We will talk about work later, Mrs. Taylor said firmly. Right now you need food and rest. Xavier, take care of her horse. Come along, dear. Catherine followed Mrs. Taylor into the main house, which was spacious and well kept. The kitchen was large, with a proper stove and plenty of workspace. The whole place smelled like bread and coffee, homey scents that made Catherine's eyes sting with unexpected emotion. Mrs. Taylor sat her down at the kitchen table and put food in front of her. Real food, not the dry bread and jerky Catherine had been living on. Stew with vegetables and meat, fresh bread with butter, cold milk from the spring house. Catherine ate mechanically, her body needing fuel even though her heart was not in it. Xavier told me about your husband, Mrs. Taylor said, sitting down across from her. I am so sorry for your loss. The territories can be cruel to those who are unprepared. Thomas tried his best, Catherine said, feeling defensive. I am sure he did, Mrs. Taylor said gently. But trying and succeeding are different things out here. I am not judging him or you. I am just sorry for what you have been through. Catherine felt tears threaten again and blinked them back. Xavier said you might need help with the house. I do, Mrs. Taylor said. My husband runs a good-sized operation here, and I cannot keep up with all the cooking and cleaning by myself anymore. Our old housekeeper left to care for her sick mother 2 months ago, and I have been struggling ever since. If you are willing to work, I will pay you $12 a month, plus room and board. You will have your own room in the house, and you will eat with the family. It is honest work, but it is hard work. Can you cook for 20 men? I can learn, Catherine said. Mrs. Taylor smiled. That is the right answer. When can you start? Whenever you need me, Catherine said. How about tomorrow? Mrs. Taylor suggested. Today, you rest. Let me show you to your room. The room was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the ranch. Catherine set her bags down and stood there for a moment, feeling unmoored. Everything had changed so fast. 2 days ago, she had been married and living in her own home. Now she was a widow, working as a housekeeper for strangers. It will get easier, Mrs. Taylor said from the doorway. Not quickly and not all at once, but it will get easier. You will find your way. Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. That evening, she met Mr. Taylor, a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He welcomed her to the ranch and told her she was safe here, which seemed an odd thing to say until she realized he was assuring her that none of his men would bother her. It was a relief she had not known she needed. Dinner was served in the main house for the family and the foreman. The ranch hands ate in the bunkhouse, with food brought out from the main kitchen. Catherine sat quietly, still numb with grief and exhaustion, and tried to follow the conversation. Xavier was there, sitting at the far end of the table, and she caught him watching her once or twice with a look of concern. After dinner, Catherine excused herself and went to her room. She lay on the bed, still in her dress, and finally allowed herself to cry. Great gasping sobs that shook her whole body, mourning not just Thomas, but the life they had tried to build and all the dreams that died with him. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she fell into a sleep so deep it felt like drowning. The next morning, Catherine woke to find Mrs. Taylor had laid out an apron and a plain work dress for her. The morning clothes would be impractical for kitchen work, Mrs. Taylor explained when Catherine found her in the kitchen. Catherine changed and joined her, and Mrs. Taylor began teaching her the routines of cooking for a ranch. It was overwhelming at first. The scale was so much larger than anything Catherine had done before. Dozens of eggs to fry, enormous pots of beans and stew, bread baked in batches that seemed endless. But Catherine threw herself into the work with desperate focus, needing something to fill her mind and tire her body so she would not have room to think about Thomas. Xavier came in for coffee mid-morning and found her up to her elbows in flour, learning to make biscuits in the massive quantities the ranch required. How are you managing? He asked. I am keeping busy, Catherine said, which was not exactly an answer. Xavier nodded, understanding what she meant. Busy is good, keeps the thoughts away. Do you speak from experience? Catherine asked. My father died of a heart attack while working on a ranch down south, Xavier said. I was 21 and suddenly I was responsible for my sisters. I worked 18-hour days for a year, trying to earn enough to keep us together. It helped having work to focus on. How did you manage? Catherine asked. Determination and stubbornness, Xavier said with a slight smile, and good people who helped when we needed it most. Like I told you, that is why I stopped for you. I remember what it is like to need help. He finished his coffee and headed back out to work, leaving Catherine with an odd warmth in her chest. Xavier Thompson was a good man, the kind of solid, steady person you could rely on. She was grateful he had found her when he did. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Catherine rose before dawn to start the stoves and prepare breakfast. She cooked enormous meals, cleaned the main house, did laundry, and helped Mrs. Taylor with the endless tasks that kept a ranch running. The work was exhausting, but it was exactly what she needed. By the time she fell into bed each night, she was too tired to do anything but sleep. Slowly, she began to learn the rhythms of the ranch, the hands who came and went, the seasonal work of cattle ranching, the personalities of the people around her. Mr. Taylor was gruff but fair. Mrs. Taylor was warm and motherly, treating Catherine with a kindness that sometimes made her want to cry. The foreman, a man named Jack Sullivan, was efficient and kept the operation running smoothly. And then there was Xavier. Catherine found herself noticing him more as the weeks passed. He was often around the main house. As one of the senior hands, he had privileges that included taking coffee breaks in the main kitchen instead of the bunkhouse. He was quiet and respectful, but he had a dry sense of humor that sometimes caught Catherine off guard. He was also unfailingly kind to her, checking in without being intrusive, offering help without making her feel incapable. One evening, about a month after Catherine arrived, Xavier found her sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and orange. The day's work was done, and she had a rare moment of quiet. Mind if I sit? Xavier asked. Please, Catherine said, gesturing to the chair beside her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky change colors. Finally, Xavier said, You are looking better. Less like you might blow away in a strong wind. Catherine smiled slightly. I feel stronger. The work helps. Mrs. Taylor says you are doing a fine job, Xavier said. She told my boss you are the best cook they have had. She is kind, Catherine said. I am still learning. You are doing more than learning, Xavier said. You are rebuilding. That takes courage. Catherine looked at him, this man who had appeared in her darkest moment and changed everything. I never properly thanked you, she said, for what you did that day. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come along. You would have figured something out, Xavier said. You are stronger than you think. I did not feel strong that day, Catherine admitted. I felt like I was drowning. Strength is not about never drowning, Xavier said. It is about keeping your head up even when the water is over your nose. You did that. They fell silent again, and Catherine felt something shift between them. An awareness that had been building slowly, now becoming impossible to ignore. She was noticing things about Xavier, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands and the gentleness he showed to animals and people alike, the calm, steady way he moved through the world, like he knew exactly who he was and did not need to prove it to anyone. It felt wrong to notice these things. Thomas had only been dead a month. She should still be deep in mourning, not noticing how another man's presence made her feel less alone. As if sensing her thoughts, Xavier stood. I should let you rest, he said. Good night, Catherine. Good night, Xavier, she said, and watched him walk away into the gathering darkness. The seasons began to change. September brought cooler nights and the hard work of preparing for winter. The ranch was busy with roundups and sorting cattle, and the main house was a constant hub of activity. Catherine threw herself into the work, and slowly, without quite realizing it, the sharp edge of her grief began to dull. She still thought of Thomas every day, still wore her mourning clothes on Sundays, but the pain was no longer quite so overwhelming. She also found herself thinking more and more about Xavier. He was around the main house often, sometimes with legitimate ranch business, sometimes, she suspected, just to check on her. They fell into an easy friendship, talking during his coffee breaks, exchanging comments about the weather or the ranch work. Xavier told her stories about his time drifting between ranches, about his sisters and their lives, about the places he had seen. Catherine found herself sharing memories of her own childhood, of her parents, even of Thomas and their brief marriage. "Do you think it is wrong to be happy again?" Catherine asked him one afternoon in October. They were sitting on the porch, shelling beans for the next day's dinner. "After losing someone, I mean." Xavier thought about it for a moment. "I think the people who love us want us to be happy," he said. "My father told me right before he died that he wanted me to live a full life, not to waste time being sad about him, but to go out and do things and be someone. I think your Thomas would want the same for you." "He would," Catherine said softly. Thomas had been generous in his love, never possessive or jealous. "He always wanted me to be happy." "Then honor his memory by letting yourself heal," Xavier said. "That is not forgetting him. It is just choosing to keep living." Catherine looked at Xavier, at his serious blue eyes, and the scar on his jaw, and the quiet strength that radiated from him. "How did you get so wise?" she asked. Xavier laughed. "I am not wise. I have just lived long enough to make a lot of mistakes and learn from them." He met her eyes. "You are allowed to move forward, Catherine, whenever you are ready." The words felt like permission for something Catherine had been afraid to acknowledge. She was starting to have feelings for Xavier, feelings that went beyond gratitude and friendship. When he walked into a room, her heart beat faster. When he smiled at her, she felt warm all over. When he rode out for a day's work, she found herself watching for his return. It should have felt like a betrayal of Thomas, but somehow it did not. Maybe because Xavier had been part of the worst day of her life, had helped her bury her husband with respect and dignity. He was not trying to replace Thomas or erase her past. He was just offering her a future if she wanted to take it. Winter came to the Arizona territories, bringing cold nights and occasional snow to the higher elevations. The ranch work slowed slightly, and the main house became a cozy refuge from the cold. Catherine and Mrs. Taylor spent long hours in the warm kitchen, cooking and baking and preserving food. Xavier and the other hands worked on maintenance and repairs, keeping the ranch ready for spring. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Taylor insisted on a special dinner for everyone, family and hands alike. Catherine helped prepare a feast, and when they all gathered around the long table in the main house, she felt something she had not felt since before Thomas died. She felt like she belonged somewhere. Xavier sat beside her during dinner, and at one point their hands brushed as they both reached for the breadbasket. The contact sent a jolt through Catherine, and she pulled back quickly, her cheeks flushing. But Xavier just smiled at her, a slow, warm smile that made her feel seen and valued. After dinner, Xavier found Catherine washing dishes in the kitchen. "Walk with me?" he asked. Catherine dried her hands and followed him outside. The night was cold and clear, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Xavier led her away from the house toward the corrals where they could talk privately. "I need to tell you something," Xavier said, and Catherine's heart began to race. "I have been holding back because I did not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I think you should know how I feel." "Xavier," Catherine started, but he held up a hand. "Let me say this," he said. "I have been drawn to you since the day I found you trying to bury your husband, not because you were vulnerable or needed help, but because of the strength I saw in you. the determination to do right by him even when you were falling apart yourself. Over these past months, I have gotten to know you better, and everything I learn makes me admire you more. You are kind and hardworking and stronger than you know, and I have fallen in love with you, Catherine. Catherine's breath caught in her throat. She had known her own feelings were developing, but hearing Xavier say the words out loud made everything suddenly real and immediate. I am still in mourning, she said softly. I know, Xavier said, and I am not asking you to stop grieving your husband or to pretend he did not matter. I am just asking if there might be room in your heart for something new when you are ready. I will wait as long as you need, but I wanted you to know that I am here, and I will be here whenever you are ready to move forward. Catherine looked at this good man who had saved her life and then given her time to heal without any expectations or demands. I think I am falling in love with you too, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And it scares me because it feels too soon and wrong and like I am betraying Thomas's memory. You are not betraying anything, Xavier said gently. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm around hers. You loved your husband, and that love does not disappear just because you are ready to love again. Hearts are big enough for multiple people, multiple chapters. Thomas was part of your life, and he always will be, but he does not have to be the end of your story. Tears rolled down Catherine's cheeks, but they were not tears of grief this time. They were tears of relief and gratitude, and the scary tentative joy of new possibilities. What do we do now? She asked. Now we take things slow, Xavier said. We keep getting to know each other. We let this grow at its own pace. And when you are ready, really ready, we will talk about what comes next. Catherine nodded, and Xavier lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with old-fashioned courtesy. The gesture was sweet and romantic, and Catherine felt her heart open in a way she had not thought possible just a few months ago. They walked back to the house together, hands linked, and Catherine felt lighter than she had in months. The grief was still there, would probably always be there in some form, but it no longer filled every corner of her life. There was room now for other things, for hope and possibility, and the promise of a future she was ready to start building. Over the winter months, Catherine and Xavier's relationship deepened. They were careful to be respectful, knowing that gossip could be cruel, but everyone at the ranch could see what was developing between them. Mrs. Taylor approved wholeheartedly, telling Catherine that Xavier was one of the finest men she had ever known and that Catherine deserved happiness after what she had been through. They took long walks in the evenings when the work was done. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing dreams and fears, and the stories that made them who they were. Xavier told Catherine about his plans to eventually own his own ranch, a small operation where he could raise horses. Catherine shared her dream of having a home that felt stable and safe, a place where she could put down roots and not feel like she was constantly fighting against the world. What if we built those dreams together? Xavier asked one evening in March. Spring was coming to the territories, and the world felt full of new beginnings. Catherine looked at him, at this man who had become so central to her life. What are you asking me, Xavier? Xavier took both her hands in his. I am asking if you would consider marrying me, not right away if you are not ready, but someday when the time feels right. I love you, Catherine. I want to build a life with you, the kind of life where we work together and support each other and make something real and lasting. Catherine's heart was pounding. It had been just over 6 months since Thomas died, still within the traditional year of mourning. But the rules that governed polite society back east felt less important out here in the territories, where survival and happiness were harder won and more precious. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you. When I am ready, when it feels right, I will marry you. Xavier's face lit up with pure joy, and he pulled her into his arms. They stood there in the gathering darkness, holding each other, and Catherine felt the last pieces of her broken heart begin to knit back together. She would always carry the memory of Thomas, would always be grateful for the love they shared. But she was ready now to move forward, to build something new with Xavier. They set the wedding for June, giving Catherine time to come out of official mourning and giving them both time to prepare. Xavier spoke to Mr. Taylor about his future at the ranch, and they worked out an arrangement where Xavier would eventually manage a section of Taylor's land with the goal of buying it outright over time. It was the opportunity Xavier had been working toward for years, and now he would build it with Catherine at his side. Catherine spent the spring months preparing, sewing a new dress that was not mourning black, making plans for the simple ceremony they would have at the ranch. Mrs. Taylor was like a mother to her through it all, helping with preparations and offering advice and support. Catherine wrote to Xavier's sisters, inviting them to the wedding, and was touched when they both wrote back with warm welcomes into the family. The wedding day arrived sunny and perfect. They married in the yard of the Double T Ranch, with Mr. Taylor officiating as Justice of the Peace and Mrs. Taylor crying happy tears. Xavier's sisters came from Tucson and Phoenix, and Catherine felt overwhelmed by the warmth of their acceptance. The ranch hands stood witness, and someone played a fiddle while Catherine and Xavier danced their first dance as husband and wife. That night, alone in the small cabin that would be their first home, Xavier held Catherine close. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I am," Catherine said, and she was surprised to realize it was completely true. She was happy in a way that was different from her happiness with Thomas, but no less real. "I love you, Xavier Thompson." "I love you, Catherine Thompson," Xavier said, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and safe. They built their life together over the following years, working the land that would eventually be theirs. Xavier proved to be everything Catherine could have hoped for in a partner. He was hardworking and steady, but he also knew how to laugh and how to make her feel valued. He never tried to make her forget Thomas, but instead honored the fact that she had loved before and was capable of deep loyalty. The first year of their marriage was hard work and simple joys. They woke before dawn and worked until after dark, building up their herd and improving their land. Catherine cooked and kept house, but she also worked alongside Xavier with the horses, discovering a talent for training that surprised them both. Xavier treated her as a true partner, asking her opinion and trusting her judgment. In the spring of 1884, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of joy and fear. She had wanted children with Thomas, but that dream had died with him. Now she was going to have a baby with Xavier, and it felt like both a gift and a responsibility. Xavier was overjoyed. He fussed over Catherine in a way that made her laugh, trying to keep her from working too hard, bringing her little treats when he went into Superior for supplies. Mrs. Taylor came to visit often, offering advice and reassurance, having raised 3 children of her own. In November of 1884, Catherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James Thomas Thompson, honoring both Xavier's father and Catherine's first husband. Xavier held his son with a look of wonder on his face, and Catherine felt her heart overflow with love for both of them. "He is perfect," Xavier whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He is ours," Catherine said, and the word felt like magic. Ours. A family they had built together from the ashes of her old life. Baby James was an easy child, healthy and happy. Catherine discovered that motherhood suited her, even with all its exhaustion and challenges. Xavier was a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him even as an infant about the horses and the land that would be his heritage. Life fell into a new rhythm, busier than before but rich with purpose. Their small operation was growing steadily. Xavier had a gift for horse breeding, and their stock was gaining a reputation for quality. Catherine managed the financial side of things, keeping careful records and making sure they were building toward true ownership of their land. In the summer of 1886, Catherine became pregnant again. This time she was less nervous, confident in her ability to manage motherhood and the ranch work. In March of 1887, She gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah Rose, after both their mothers. Xavier was just as thrilled with his daughter as he had been with his son, doting on the baby girl with unabashed affection. "We are building something real here," Xavier said one evening, holding Sarah while James played at his feet. "A family, a future, something that will last." Catherine looked at her husband and children, at the home they had made together, and felt a contentment that went bone deep. "We are," she agreed, "and I could not ask for anything more." The years continued to pass, marked by the seasons and the steady growth of both their family and their operation. In 1889, they were finally able to purchase the land outright from Mr. Taylor, who was scaling back his operation. It was 300 acres of good grazing land with water rights and a solid house that Xavier and Catherine had expanded over the years. James grew into a serious, capable boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Sarah was bright and lively, equally comfortable helping in the house or riding out with her father to check the herds. In 1890, Catherine had a third child, another daughter named Emma Grace, who seemed determined from birth to charm everyone she met. Catherine sometimes thought about Thomas, especially on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and she had time to reflect. She had loved him, and she still honored that love, but it no longer hurt the way it once had. He had been part of her journey, an important chapter, but not the whole story. Xavier had given her a future she had not dared to dream of when she was standing in the Arizona desert, trying to dig a grave in ground too hard to yield. One evening in the spring of 1892, Catherine and Xavier sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The children were inside with Xavier's sister, who was visiting from Tucson. It was a rare moment of quiet. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked. "Taking on a widow with nothing. You could have had an easier life." Xavier looked at her with surprise. "Not for 1 second," he said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine. You and our children, this life we built together. Easy is overrated. This, what we have, is worth every bit of work it took to get here." Catherine leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "I think about that day sometimes," she said, "when you rode up and found me trying to bury Thomas. I was so lost and so scared, and then you were there and everything changed." "I think about it too," Xavier said. "How easily I could have ridden right past, been 5 minutes later or early. But I was there exactly when you needed me. Some might call it luck, but I think it was something more. We were meant to find each other, Catherine, meant to build this life together." "Do you believe in fate?" Catherine asked. "I believe some things are meant to be," Xavier said. "And I believe that good people deserve happiness even after loss. You deserved a second chance, and I am grateful I got to be part of it." Catherine turned and kissed him, a kiss full of love and gratitude and the deep comfort of shared years. When they pulled apart, Xavier smiled at her, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart beat faster after all these years. "I love you," Catherine said, "more than I ever thought possible." "I love you too," Xavier said. "Always have, always will." Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing at something their aunt had said. The sound was pure and joyful, the sound of a happy home and a secure future. Catherine and Xavier sat together in the fading light, holding hands and watching their world turn golden with the setting sun. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Thompson name became respected throughout the territory. James grew into a young man who shared his father's quiet strength and his mother's practical intelligence. Sarah developed a gift for healing, eventually studying with the doctor in Superior and becoming known throughout the region for her skill with both people and animals. Emma married a young rancher from a neighboring property, bringing two families together in a partnership that benefited both operations. In 1899, Catherine and Xavier celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They were in their early 40s now, no longer young but still strong and capable. Their hair showed threads of gray, and their faces bore the lines of years spent working under the Arizona sun. But their love had only deepened with time. 15 years, Catherine said, looking at the simple gold band on her finger. Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. The best 15 years of my life, Xavier said. He took her hand, his thumb rubbing over the ring he had placed there in 1883. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for taking the shovel that day, Catherine said. Thank you for saying a prayer and giving me a reason to keep going. You saved my life, Xavier, in every way that matters. They held a celebration at the ranch, inviting friends and family from all over the territory. Mr. and Mrs. Taylor came, older now but still sharp and vital. Xavier's sisters came with their families. The ranch hands, some old and some new, gathered to celebrate with the bosses they respected and liked. It was a night of music and laughter and good food, a night that celebrated not just a marriage but a whole community that had grown up around the Thompson Ranch. As Catherine looked around at all the people gathered in celebration, she thought about the girl she had been, standing in the desert with bleeding hands and a heart broken beyond repair. That girl could never have imagined this future, this fullness, this joy. But she had survived, had chosen to keep living, and had been rewarded with a second chance at happiness. Xavier found her standing at the edge of the celebration, looking thoughtful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sliding an arm around her waist. "How far we have come," Catherine said. "How different everything is from that day you found me." "Better?" Xavier asked. "So much better," Catherine confirmed. "I love Thomas, and I am glad I had the time with him that I did. But this, with you, this is the life I was meant to have. You are the partner I was meant to build a future with." Xavier kissed her temple. "We still have a lot of future ahead of us," he said. "A lot more years to enjoy together." And they did. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep satisfaction. They became grandparents, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes of James's children and Emma's growing family. Sarah never married, choosing instead to dedicate herself to her medical practice, but she was a beloved presence in all their lives, the aunt who always had time for the children and wisdom for the adults. Catherine continued to manage the business side of the ranch, her careful record-keeping and financial acumen helping to ensure their continued success through the changing times. Xavier worked with the horses he loved, training and breeding stock that was sought after throughout the territory and beyond. They worked together with the easy partnership of long-married couples who knew each other's strengths and supported each other's dreams. In the spring of 1905, Catherine and Xavier made a journey back to the place where it had all begun. The old homestead where Catherine had lived with Thomas was long abandoned. The buildings collapsed, and the land reclaimed by the desert. But Thomas's grave was still there, the rocks Xavier had placed still marking the spot after all these years. Catherine stood over the grave with Xavier at her side. "Thank you, Thomas," she said softly, "for loving me and for showing me it was possible to build a life out here. I hope you are at peace, wherever you are. I hope you know I have been happy." Xavier squeezed her hand, and they stood there for a moment in respectful silence. Then they walked back to their horses and rode home together, toward the life they had built and the future that still stretched before them. In 1910, Catherine and Xavier celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary. They were in their early 50s, considered elders now in their community. Their children were grown and settled. Their grandchildren were thriving, and their ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. Arizona had become a state was working toward it, and they had been part of watching the wild territories transform into something more settled and civilized. "Do you miss the old days?" Catherine asked Xavier one evening. They were sitting on the porch, as they had done thousands of times over the years. When everything was wilder and less certain, Xavier thought about it. Sometimes I miss the simplicity, he admitted, but I do not miss the hardship or the danger. I like this better. Growing old with you, watching our family flourish, knowing we built something that will last beyond us. We did well, did we not? Catherine said. We did, Xavier agreed. Better than well. We took tragedy and loss and turned it into something beautiful. That is not nothing, Catherine. Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the same sense of rightness she had felt for 27 years. I love you, she said. Today and always. Always, Xavier echoed, and they sat together as the sun set over the Arizona landscape they had made their home. The years continued their steady march. Catherine and Xavier aged gracefully, their love only deepening with time. They saw their grandchildren grow and marry, welcomed great-grandchildren, and remained active in their community, even as they gradually handed over the day-to-day running of the ranch to James and his family. In the summer of 1920, they celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. They were in their 60s now, their bodies showing the wear of hard-lived lives, but their spirits were strong. They still took their evening walks, still sat together on the porch watching sunsets, still held hands like newlyweds. 37 years, Catherine marveled. More than half my life spent with you. The best half, Xavier said with a smile. The best half, Catherine agreed. They talked about the journey that had brought them together, about the day Xavier had found Catherine trying to bury her husband and had taken the shovel from her hands, about how he had said a prayer over a stranger's grave and offered kindness to a desperate widow, about how that single act of compassion had changed both their lives forever. I think about the prayer you said that day, Catherine said. Do you remember what you said? I asked for peace for him and strength for you, Xavier recalled. And I guess both those prayers were answered. Thomas is at peace, and you found the strength to keep going and build a new life. We built it together, Catherine corrected. I could not have done any of this without you. We made a good team, Xavier said. We still do. As the sun set that evening, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Catherine and Xavier sat close together, their hands intertwined. They had built a life of substance and meaning, a family that would carry on after them, a legacy of love and hard work and determination. It had started with tragedy, with death and loss and desperate survival. But it had transformed into something beautiful, something worth every hardship and every struggle. No regrets? Xavier asked, as he had asked so many times over the years. Not a single one, Catherine said, as she always did. Just gratitude for every day I have had with you. They sat together as darkness fell, two people who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and had chosen to build something lasting from the ruins of loss. Their love story had started with a grave and a prayer, but it had become so much more. It had become a life fully lived, a partnership fully realized, and a love that would endure through all their remaining days. In the years that followed, Catherine and Xavier continued to enjoy the life they had built together. They watched their family grow and flourish, taking pride in the strong, capable people their children and grandchildren had become. They remained active in their community, known as wise elders who had helped shape the territory into a state and had built something lasting from the harsh desert land. When they finally passed, years later, and within months of each other as long married couples sometimes do, they were buried together on the ranch they had built. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to remember two people who had shown that loss did not have to be an ending, that tragedy could transform into triumph, and that love could be found even in the darkest moments if you were brave enough to keep your heart open to possibility. The Thompson Ranch continued for generations, a testament to the vision and hard work of the couple who had founded it. And the story of how it all began, with a cowboy taking a shovel from a widow's hands and saying a prayer over her husband's grave, became family legend, passed down through the years as a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in life can lead to the best chapters, and that kindness offered in moments of desperation can change everything. Catherine and Xavier's love story was not the fairy tale she had imagined as a young girl, but it was real and true and lasting. It was built on mutual respect and shared work, on laughter and tears, on the everyday choices to support and cherish each other through all the seasons of life. It proved that second chances exist, that healing is possible, and that love can bloom even in the hardest soil if tended with patience and care. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Catherine and Xavier left behind. Not just the ranch or the family or the success they had achieved, but the proof that life goes on after loss, that joy can follow sorrow, and that sometimes a stranger appearing on the horizon at exactly the right moment can change the course of your entire life. The cowboy who took the shovel and said a prayer had given Catherine more than help with a grave. He had given her a future, a family, and a love that lasted all their days.